everybody? Ty here. Hope everyone's doing well. So, we've had a nice little break from severe weather, but tomorrow it's back to business here. We have a slight risk of severe storms. I talked about this the other day, but we're going into a little bit greater detail, especially now that we have the hazard types available to us. There is actually a 5% tornado threat with this region. It's mainly going to be centered around that Ohio West Virginia line here, but we do need to watch a couple areas further off towards the west. I am kind of interested in this environment just a little bit more over here as of the dinner models for the east and northeastern parts of Kentucky as well. So, going to be extra invested in this area tomorrow. We will most likely be going live. We'll have to see how work goes for me, of course. No, never really a guarantee there, but hopefully I can get off at a reasonable time to present the live coverage for you guys, of course. Wind and hail threats are also big hazards. All three hazards are pretty much possible here. I don't necessarily know for sure just which hazard type is going to win out, so to speak. I would want to say wind. The hail threat is still just as prominent, though. And the temperatures, the overall environment towards this region as a whole is kind of apt for all three. I'm leaning a little bit towards wind right now, but we'll see what ends up happening there. As we go beyond that point here, day 3 is quiet, and then we get towards days 5 and 6. We have slight risk and effect with day 7 and 8 with predictability tags too low. So we're going to have potential for maybe another severe weather event to get into the Easter weekend and maybe even to close out the month here. The pattern itself just looks like it's very active. We went over this a couple of days ago, but I'm starting to see more prominent signals here. Today we are going to have the Euro on the bottom left corner of the screen here. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of run these as efficiently as we can. We'll kind of be jumping back and forth here. So not really a whole lot to talk about with Monday's setup starting out, of course. We're mainly going to be putting focus on the setups later in the week, which would start on Thursday here. So pay attention to GFS first, which is the main one on the screen. The Euro, of course, on the bottom left corner. What you'll notice here is GFS has a little bit of sign of diffluence beginning to occur here, which air is spreading out. And usually when that happens, we'll start to see signs of thunderstorm development over towards our severe weather area here. But the interesting thing is, the Euro, at first look, it shows a pretty similar signal here. But as we get later into the day, it seems like we struggle to get a lot in the way of initiation. It's a very small area in comparison here. Hence why the National Weather Service went with a small area. It's a little bit larger on GFS and it takes a little bit longer. So a little bit of discrepancy there in regards to timing and overall initiation as a whole, which leads me to think that there is potential for maybe a little bit of capping over towards this region. And also leads me to think kind of that we might have the hail threat be the most dominant threat for Thursday. As we head into Friday, this is where things really start to get notable between the two in regards to the outcomes here. So this is Friday's threat on the GFS. You can see what almost looks like a boundary beginning to pop up here. In multiple areas where we end up seeing a diffluence. As a result, we end up seeing what could be a multicellular mode. We may see some linear we may see a linear mode with prefrontal cells. But the thing with the Euro, if we go to this again, we don't really get the same picture, and everything that looks like it tries to fire is a little bit further off towards the west, which means the forcing isn't as far out, which would lead to a slightly lower chance of a severe threat here. We'll have to see which of the two models went out here, which is usually why I show you both. These, in my opinion, are probably the two most reliable models that I look at, truthfully. So we'll have to see how things pan out with that. There also is a chance that the Euro's kind of going with more of a shortwave setup versus the long wave setup, which we're already seeing at this point in time. So we'll be showing the 700 here momentarily. Things become even more interesting as we get into the Easter weekend here. As we know, Easter is going to be falling on 420, so I know a lot of people are going to be out and about. GFS shows a pretty stout setup, especially as we head into Sunday here. So I'm especially invested in this event. I'm watching this one very closely. But again, once we get into the Euro here, take a look at what we have going on. The two setups are relatively similar. The trough evolution is the same. We have a little jet streak that tries to pop up over here. Much more prominent signal, of course, on the GFS of the two. But I'm kind of thinking that there might be a little bit in the way of capping. cap might be weaker off to the east here, so the River region, Missouri River region might be the point of interest for severe weather in the Euro, whereas the GFS is kind of staying just to the east of that Red River Valley and west of the Mississippi as well. So we're going to be kind of all over the place trying to figure out just where exactly the area of interest is going to be. As we go further along, you'll see the Euro kick this storm out, and then we get another pretty stout system that pops up over towards the northern states, and we'll then watch the weather pattern calm down until the very end of the month. But it's still questionable as to what happens with that there, because we're past no man's land, I would say, which is a 300-hour mark and beyond. Now the GFS is much more active out of the two as we go further along here. Here's another system that we'll have to watch that's over towards the 25th and the 26th, then another system to follow up behind that on the 27th to the 29th that we'll probably be watching out for as well going further along. Now, kind of verify what we have going on with the Euro and the GFS here, of course, let's go ahead and look at that 700 millibar map. This is where our mid levels are, and from this point we're kind of looking more for short wave troughs versus the long waves here. I think I'm going to make a video talking about short waves and long waves troughs for the Weather Nerd 101 list, especially once we get another slowdown in severe weather, so that way you get a better idea as to what I'm talking about. For those of you, of course, that are more interested in it. But either way, if we were to go ahead and take a look at how GFS looks with these upcoming setups here, because I almost skipped Thursday here, oddly enough, silly me. You can see that shortwave's rather prominent over here as we head into Thursday, especially over towards the Missouri River Valley or Missouri River region. And then, of course, we have the more stout look for Friday. Saturday, kind of a similar look. I would say anywhere west of the Red River probably is going to be the point of interest, maybe even an overnight threat for the 19th. And then heading into the 20th, we already know the situation. The Red River, east of the Red River, and then heading up towards Missouri River and pretty much in the Ozarks region is going to be the point of interest. Our discrepancy with the Euro here, and I got to switch this over to 700. I'm out here trying to move the 500 when it's at max range. But the thing to make note of with the Euro here, and we'll start with the 17th, which is Thursday again. You see a shortwave again popping up towards this region, and that's really about it. There might be a secondary that kind of pops up here late. We'll have to see if this ends up kind of verifying or not. But either way, no matter how you look at it, there is a little something that pops up here, but it's not quite as prominent of a signal in comparison to the GFS. Like I said, it's going to be interesting to see which of the two models went out in this scenario here. Then as we keep rolling forward here, this is heading into the 18th. Like I said, it really just seems like over towards the Texas Panhandle, maybe towards central Oklahoma, it kind of pops off a little bit more. Then heading into the overnight for the 19th, we just don't really have that stout of a signal across the board here. The short waves are pretty weak on Easter Sunday itself as well. So it's kind of hard to get a read as to what the Euro is trying to show me here. I do think that some capping may be involved, or temperature inversion here, which can often help keep storms at bay, or storm development at bay, I should say. But we'll end up seeing whether or not that pans out or not. Really, from this point, this is all I really have to show you from the Euro here. So we'll go ahead and take that off the screen. But from this point, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the low-level jet from the GFS here. So at this point, we're kind of taking a look at the scenario if things go the GFS route versus the Euro route. Because right now, the Euro is not showing a super prominent signal for severe weather. We'll probably end up having to hash over this like again tomorrow or Tuesday, depending on how the live stream goes. But this is our low-level jet for tomorrow. GFS isn't quite as aggressive with this as, let's say, HRRR is. There is a decent signal here nonetheless, though, as we get into the afternoon. This would be our peak time for storm development over here towards the Ohio and West Virginia line here, which is, I think, the point of interest. There's also a little bit of reinforcing that could be going on over here towards the tri-state region, Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia as well. So a lot of moving parts here. You also have to remember the mountains can also create a gravity wave too, which can be another factor to aid in severe weather and tornado genesis as a whole. Hence the reason we're going live here. It's a little bit of a wild card and maybe even a conditional threat for a strong tornado at this point. We go further along and we'll start to see our Thursday threat come into play here. There is some decent low-level jet available over towards this region. I'm liking how the directional shear looks particularly. So, like I said, depending on how these two models pan out here, we could ultimately end up seeing a decent tornado threat versus a tornado threat that's not quite as impressive based off what I was seeing on the Euro here. This is heading into Thursday. We see that low-level jet strengthen, of course, heading into Friday. And then here is a look at that. What I would expect to predominantly be more of a wind event, but anywhere I would say that's over towards the Arkansas region, maybe even over towards Missouri as we head into Friday, could be an increased tornado threat. And then again, I'm really concerned about the potential of an overnight tornado threat just to the west or even within the Oklahoma City limits, maybe, depending on what I'm seeing with the GFS here. Obviously, we're still pretty far out of range. We only have a handful of models that are capable of showing this range right now. But low-level jet's looking really good, especially as we get later into the evening. And it, of course, always goes up after sunset, too. So you always have to be watchful of this. Then as we go into Sunday afternoon, we have ample low-level jet here. We're at about 50 knots here, which is more than sufficient enough for severe weather and tornado genesis here as we go forward. And then we'll watch this head out by the 21st, and then we're pretty much going on from that point here. So here on out, we're going to be kind of looking at the thermos here. This is us looking at the moisture returns here, our dew points at the surface. Notice as we get towards Easter Sunday and beyond here, we have a really strong return here, and then we kind of keep that streak going here. We continue to have Gulf moisture just pumping back into play here, whereas before, with this last week, we had a trough come in and kind of keep that moisture down into the Gulf and at bay at this point. But now it looks like we're back in business, so to speak, when it comes to severe weather here. Usually without this moisture, severe weather is a lot less likely. Not impossible, but a little bit less likely. Also, another big topic over here that we're going to cover is the temperatures as a whole here. The surface temperatures are going to be quite notable, not just within the severe weather areas, but just as a whole for this region, or for the lower 48 actually in general here. I would say that maybe even towards the end of the week, we may even get like some record highs before all is said and done, and especially as we get further past Easter here. Look at how warm we end up getting over here as we head into Friday. We get mid 80s across the board here, across the deep south, and even getting some 80s sneaking into the Midwest here before all is said and done. So, like I said, some record highs may be in jeopardy here before all is said and done. The place where the temperatures are best right now, depending on how you look at it, me, since I work outside, I have a bias towards cooler temperatures. But over here towards the Mountain West seems to be pretty nice right now, getting into the 40s and 50s. There are going to be some cooler days out ahead before the month ends up ending here, and we'll have to watch and see how that ends up panning out. There's still going to be the potential for chilly mornings, of course, out towards the east, but those are going to become a little bit fewer and far in between, further in between, as we head towards the very end of the month here. So looking at our severe weather potential going forward here, this is where things really start to get interesting. Some of the other events that may follow, I'm a little less certain about once we get past Easter, but there are some troubling signs here. There is a lot of instability, especially as we get after Easter weekend here. You can see the Cape values. I keep wanting to say dew point values for whatever reason, but the Cape values here, we're getting up to about 2,000, 3,000 joules per kilogram in Cape. Usually I would say the threshold is about 750 to 1,000 joules per kilogram to get some stronger thunderstorms. So we got a pretty amped up environment going forward as we head towards the very end of the month here. So a lot we're going to be keeping track of going forward here. Expect the content to pretty much continue from this point, because we never really stopped even after that severe weather event as a whole. But be prepared to see a few extra live streams and keep an eye out if your area is a point of interest here. So one thing we're going to do before we head out, of course, is we're going to first take a look at Monday here. And this is where I was really interested in. This is where I became really interested in maybe east central parts of Kentucky over here, maybe even northeastern parts as well. right around the time our storms would end up firing, which would be, I would say, about 4 to 6 Eastern, we do have this little area that pops up over here where we have over 2,000 joules per kilogram cape here. And while the directional shear is not incredible, there is some decent speed shear here. And usually with that, and decent dew points like what we see here, and good lifting mechanisms, we can get some supercells to fire, and there is potential for some tornadoes. The thermodynamics in this environment are very good. Like I said, it's that loop in the hodograph that's not all that impressive. If we had more directional shear, I would be increasingly concerned with this look here, but it's still an acceptable look nonetheless here, and tornadoes at this point would be very much possible. This, however, is within our 2% area, and our 5% area, which would be over here. Let's get a better look at that. Like I said, it's pretty much kind of the same deal here. There's been a little bit of an uptrend in regards to the shear, whereas earlier when I was looking at this, let's say towards morning, maybe lunchtime, the shear was a little bit lower. Still, I would say at this point, the dominant threat towards this region is severe storms. A lot of this is going to have to do with the lack of moisture that's further out towards the east here. So timing may end up being a factor which may help or hurt the storm system tomorrow. So a lot to keep an eye on for that region there. Again, we're going to take a closer look at what time these storms are going to develop. Like I said, it will really be closer towards maybe 4 to 6 o'clock here. I really think they might shift some of that slight risk to the west as well to cover this area here, especially with the way this looks. Eventually we kind of go into a semi-linear mode here and kind of a clustered multicellular mode to end out the evening before all is said and done. Like I said, I'm really thinking damaging winds are going to be the main threat with the potential for hail too, but I think a few tornadoes are possible, and I wouldn't even rule out a strong one, but I think directional shear is going to be part of one of the big inhibiting factors, along with the timing of the setup itself. Now, looking at the rest of the model run period here, so we're going to go the rest of the 2 weeks. This is our storm system that's going to be causing our severe weather tomorrow evening. We also get some snow on the backside of this. It's not going to amount to much of anything, so wouldn't be too concerned, but it might be a nice little sight for some of you. For others, I'm sure you're tired of seeing snow. Most of this is going to result in flurries unless you're off the lakes here and maybe up towards the mountains. After that point, our attention pretty much shifts over towards severe weather, minus some mountain snow and a little bit of rain over towards the southwest as well. If you're up towards the mountains of the southwest, you may even see a little bit of a switch over to snow. And then from this point, this is where our severe weather period begins. We see our first set of storms here. Not really a whole lot showing up on Thursday, start for the GFS on radar. As we get towards Friday, a little bit more of a stout setup there. As we get into the afternoon, the evening of the 19th, this is our overnight storm threat there. Then here is our setup for Easter Sunday. And then from that point, you can see that the weather pattern just continues to remain active from this point. There may even be chance for one little short snowstorm over here towards the Dakotas here in northern parts of Nebraska before all is said and done. And then from that point onward, I think this is how we're going to close out the rest of the month. It looks like the storm system after storm system looks like it's going to keep on coming through. Here's another surface low around the 29th that we could be watching. Obviously, looking at the 384 hour range, that's not set in stone at this point. But that's all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. You found it useful. We did good to keep this one under 20 minutes. Definitely make sure you hit that like button for that reason, if nothing else. Also hit that subscribe button if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, take care and have a good night.